So, unlike in the past, the knowledge economy has always been important. But it is the main drivers of the economic growth of the 21st century. Without the best of education, a country is heading nowhere in terms of sustainable economic growth. Knowledge-based economy is therefore key. Education is an economic model for growth and sustainability. We have to move to a knowledge-based economy. It is the main driver and brains behind innovation. It is the brains behind manufacturing and the brains behind the management of productivity. We cannot continue to build our future on mineral resources. It is not the true wealth of a nation. All the progressive countries are operating a knowledge-based economy. Research shows that there is no country that has ever grown without massive investment in human capital development. So, what is human capital development? Let us take the definition. It says it is the collective skills, knowledge, or other intangible assets of individuals that can be used to create economic value for the individual, their employers, or their community. Community here could be seen as a country. Education is an investment in human capital that pays off in terms of what? Higher productivity. But this is the interesting thing. Now, low-income countries account for 37% of world population, 11% of world GDP, but we account for less than 1% of all US registered patents taken out by investors in year 2000. The top 20 countries in patenting, all high-income countries, account for 98% of all patents. Now you see why we export cocoa beans, right? And they bring in tens of products back that are patented, we cannot copy or we cannot duplicate, but we end up buying. They are also the largest investors in what? In education. So we are going to see where the problem is. What we basically do as a company is this. If you have issues, right, we come to you, we look at your processes, we look at the deficiencies, we look at the gaps. We are able to identify these factors, right, by working backwards. We look at your finances, cost control, operations, sales and marketing. And by the time we walk backwards some years into your operations, we are able to detect what the problem is and where you took the wrong turn. So in the case of Nigeria, what I simply did was to take Nigeria back 57 years, right from 1960. In the 60s, it was good, right? In the 70s, it was good. So what were we doing at those periods? And where did we go wrong? So, if you look at the net or adjusted net savings of a country, right? Net national savings plus education expenditure, is equals to net national savings plus education expenditure minus what? Energy depletion, minus mineral depletion, minus net forest depletion, minus damage from carbon dioxide emission, minus damage from particulate emission. What does it tell us? Every mineral resources you have, right, is on the minus. For instance, if you have 500 million barrels of crude buried underground, right? By the time you start extracting it, next year you cannot sell that oil well for the same price. But the difference in education is this. Whatever you put in a child, whatever you put in an individual, right? That investment increases the value of that person. And that person's worth is increased. This is the value that the Western world, Europe, North America, right, and the Asian countries have now adopted. But the interesting thing that you will see through data is why our economy was progressing in the 60s and 70s, what we were doing. Now, we conducted the research using data from 80 countries, countries from 6 continents, narrowed down to about 3 countries per continent. All 80 countries proved our hypothesis correct. Asia and Africa were serious case study for Nigeria. Why? Because some of the countries that have overtaken us today, we were ahead of them in the 60s and 70s. And then when we matched this data, everything became clear what we were doing wrong. Nigeria was ahead in per capita income compared to some Asian and African countries in the early 80s. And these countries are ahead of us today. So, this is our GDP. As I said, I'm taking the country back 57 years to 1960. In 1960, our GDP was 4.2 billion. By 1970, it had increased to 12.6 billion. And by 1981, it had increased to 61.1 billion. By 2014, it had increased to 569 billion. Now, the next slide shows our education expenditure. In 1970, right, we had an education expenditure of $185.7 million with a population of 56 million people. And that 185.7 million represented 1.47% of the budget. Remember, the UN says what? 5% of your what? Your GDP. Or 26% of your budget. This figure represented 1.47% of our GDP, rather, not budget. By 1981, if you look at the graph, right, we had started increasing the education budget. The education budget had started going up. We started conforming with what UN was saying, right? And by 1981, we had reached 3 billion, representing 4.9%, approximately what? 5%. And by 1981, we had a population of 75 million people. But the interesting thing was to happen. From 1982, education expenditure started reducing. And by 1986, with a population of 86.1 million people, education budget had reduced to less than $1 billion. And that year, it was 608 million, representing 2.9%. And then it stayed below $1 billion for 20 years. It wasn't until 2006 that education expenditure on the federal level went above $1 billion for the first time in 20 years. By 2006, we had hit a population of 145 million people. And education expenditure was 1.19 billion, representing 0.8% of the GDP. By 2011, 30 years after, education expenditure went back to what it was in 1981. You know why I'm saying this? What is the wealth of a nation? What is the wealth of a nation? It is the people. The people are the wealth of a nation. But the reverse is what we are practicing in Africa. We believe that the mineral resources is our wealth, right? The Western world believes that the wealth of a nation is what? Is the people. And that's why they invest in human capital development. Your mineral resources will continue to be depleted, but people will continue to what? Increase.